And welcome to the launch of the book, Let Me Hijack Your Mind, Restart Your Life with Freedom, by the late Alyque Padamsee, co-authored with Vandana Saxena Porya, who worked with him on the book for 3 years prior to his death. Ms. Vandana Saxena, OBE, is Chief Alarmist, the Human Alarm Clock and Company. A warm welcome also to our panelists, Ms. Paro Anand, well-known author of children's literature, and Mr. Faisal Al-Qazi, educationist, theatre director, and activist. It is our privilege to host this program at IIC in honor of India's iconic advertising and theatre guru, the late Mr. Alyque Padamsee. It also gives me great pleasure to invite Ms. Alyque Padamsee, who couldn't be here. She's joining us online to introduce and moderate this program. I welcome her to take over from here. Thank you.
With usual trees, as he was doing a film on saving the trees, to exploring all kinds of theatre, both here and abroad, from lunchtime theatre to gay theatre to experimental theatre, and of course Broadway and the West End. It was a smorgasbord of stimuli, which was an exciting childhood, and to top it all, we grew up in a house that was designed as a theatre, where the drawing room was the stage and the huge terrace was where the audience sat. That kind of an upbringing definitely lends itself to an exploration of all kinds of thinking. And so we shared a lot of creativity, worked on several productions together, shared our common love for all things fantastical, and yet very clear that they had to have relevance, no matter how nuanced. He was always ideating, and that's how, when he met Vandana Saxena Porya, the germ of the second book was born and came to fruition. Vandana and he spent many hours sharing, exploring, dissecting so many new and interesting concepts, ideas, life hacks, that this book was the creative outcome. Let me introduce you to our very prolific panel for today on the area of igniting a culture of critical thinking. We have Faisal Al-Qazi, an educationist, theatre director, and activist who lives and works in New Delhi. Over the past 40 years, he has carved out his own niche with his group, Ruchika. He has directed over 200 plays with adults in Hindi, English, and Urdu. Most recently, 2 plays written by him have been produced, Noor and A Quiet Desire. In addition, he's directed over 100 productions for schools all over India. Faisal is actively involved in the field of heritage education, initiating projects in Delhi, Jaipur, Srinagar, and Hyderabad, each of which have culminated in a book. Faisal has also written over 20 books. Welcome, Faisal. And we have Paro Anand, a fearless writer and performance storyteller with a big heart. She's been honored with the Sahitya Akademi Bal Sahitya Puraskar Award 2017 for her book Wild Child, now published as Like Smoke with additional content. She was invited to speak at the Harvard India Conference at the Kennedy School. Recognized internationally and locally, including by President Kalam of India, she headed the National Center for Children's Literature, has interacted with over 3 lakh people, primarily children in difficult circumstances, and runs a program, Literature in Action. She also received the Kalinga Karubaki Award for Fearless Writers in 2019. BBC Hindi selected her on their 100 Women project, a project highlighting the challenges and achievements of women in India. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Vandana Saxena Porya, an OBE and one of the top 100 UK India influencers. She is known as the Human Alarm Clock due to her disruptive thinking, which ignites people into action. A chartered accountant from the UK, she has extensive experience in translating academic and industry texts into digestible stories and training exercises for corporates globally. Vandana spent 3 years collaborating with Dad on this book prior to his passing. So get ready for a crackerjack evening of discussion, debate, and a lot of interaction. There's a lot of audience participation along with some very relevant audience polls. And to kick off this launch, we have a few words from our very, very favorite author and MLA from Thiruvananthapuram. Any guesses? Well, let's see him up on the video.
Hello, I'm Shashi Tharoor, and I'm delighted that we're celebrating the launch of his book, Let Me Hijack Your Mind. Well, it's not really his book, and that Vandana Saxena Poria took the trouble of conducting a number of extended conversations with him, distilling the wisdom, rendering them into fluent and readable prose, and making a book out of it. But the book, in so many ways, embodies some of the finest qualities of the provocative intellect that Alyque Padamsee was. We've all known him in his various avatars as a creative genius, as an ad man extraordinaire, and in my own case, as a theatre director, because as a young man I was a student of his then wife Pearl Padamsee at Campion School, Bombay. So my first exposure to Alyque was when he came over to help her in directing Oliver, the musical play, in which I played the Artful Dodger. And some of my more memorable experiences were hearing Alyque barking out to some hapless 12-year-old in the cast, "Stop running around like a chicken with your head cut off," and other such imprecations. Alyque was wonderful. We got to see a lot of each other over the years as I was often invited to their marvelous home on Woodhouse Road in Colaba, where plays would take place on the terrace and sketches. Pearl and Alyque were just bubbling with not just creative energy, but an enthusiasm for life, which infected many of us. Seeing the spark of Alyque Padamsee coming out again in this book is a particular joy. I wish you all a great deal of happiness in remembering Alyque on this special occasion, and I hope you will read the book, and along with Vandana Saxena Poria, that you will celebrate the mind and the heart of our great friend Alyque Padamsee, who will live on for a long, long time in all of us and in all that he's left behind. Thanks very much, and may the book be a great success.
Well, that was really lovely. And I just want to share with you all this evening. I know some of you knew both my parents, Pearl and Alyque. Today happens to be Pearl's birthday, and I chose this day especially to launch the book in Delhi. So we're very, very happy to have you all here with us. Thank you once again. And Vandana, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, great to be here, and thank you so much to the India International Centre for collaborating with us on this Delhi launch of Let Me Hijack Your Mind. So I'd like to invite on the stage Faisal and Paro. Please give them a big round of applause. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. People on the left, I don't know if you want to move kind of that way a bit because it might be easier to see us. And it would be nice to have you closer as well, if you're comfortable doing that. Okay. If you're comfortable there, that's fine. So, welcome to everyone. And you know, hijack is a very negative word. We had lots of people who said, you can't call the book hijack. Hijack's a terrible word. And in lots of ways, it is a terrible word, but it was meant to be used in this capacity by Alyque, because Alyque said over the years that I just think people have outsourced their thinking. They've outsourced their thinking to, for example, if we go back a few millennia, to religion. Religion is what told us what to do, how to do it, how we should behave. Then monarchies and government came in and told us what to do it, how to behave. And then, of course, celebrities and media came in and also tell us every day what to do, how to do it, etc., etc. And, of course, we have parents and society. So Alyque's view was very much that we've stopped thinking for ourselves and we're consistently aiming at meeting the expectations of people and societies that actually don't exist anymore. And perhaps we're just carrying on following these unwritten rules. And some of the damage of that is, and it's something that we know there's a worldwide epidemic now in terms of, let's forget COVID, but of mental illness, of people feeling ostracized from society or feeling that they have to keep up in order to belong. So in the book, Alyque discusses the hypocrisies and the unwritten rules that we live by and the unhappiness that it's causing in the world. And in true Alyque Padamsee style, we are going to try and shake up the status quo and get everyone to think differently. So where does the word hijack fit in? He says, we've outsourced our thinking. It's time to hijack it back. It's time to get it back and now start saying, you know, do I actually believe in this? Why do I do this? Etc., etc. So today we've got a fascinating panel who cuts across arts, media, and other forms of entertainment and also business, because there's no doubt theatre productions don't work unless you're profitable. So you've got to have that business mind as well. So we have a great panel here, and we're hoping to get all of you involved as well. So as a starting point, I have to ask a couple of questions that were framed by our late friend. And he said, Vandana, you must ask people this at the launch, if I'm not around, he said. How many of you are over 50? Okay, I can say that too, I'm there. Okay, all of you, your job tonight is, if you enjoy the discussion, please buy 2 copies of the book. One is for you, and the other is to gift it to somebody under the age of 25. Because the book is dedicated to Youngistan. It's dedicated to the young of India, who he feels we have left a very difficult world. And he hopes that the book and the discussions that we have around the book are going to get people to think differently and perhaps stand up. And I know that Fazil and Paro are both going to talk about personal stories of Alyque, where he did do things that were almost dangerous for himself and his family, but he was committed to doing it because he would stand up for a cause. Right. The next question that I have to ask you, again, from the great man himself, is how many in the audience are from the corporate sector? And I don't think there'd be many here, but that's okay. How many are from the arts? Okay. And how many are entrepreneurs? How many are retired and enjoying their retirement? Okay. And the rest of you? The rest of you, is anyone going to shout out, what do you do? Educators, okay, great. Civil servants, okay, so we've got civil servants, we've got arts, we've got educators, we have entrepreneurs, and we have retired people in the audience. Okay, so we've got a great cross-section. The only thing I feel very sad about is that Alyque did task me and say he'd like the audience to reflect modern India, so he wanted 50% under the age of 25. But that was always going to be a tough ask, and during COVID times, even more difficult. But we are going to start by talking about a topic that is very close to all of our hearts, because we've all been through the education system. And the first chapter that we're going to look at is a chapter where Alyque talks about education versus edutainment. So edutainment is a term that Alyque coined many years ago. I think it was in the 80s or the 90s, where he said that education should be entertaining if the student is going to be enthused. Now, a question to ask our audience: Do you think the onus should be on the student to learn or the teacher to enthuse? How many people think the onus should be on the student to learn? Okay, 2, 3. And a very firm one there, so thank you for that. How many of you are very much that it's for the teacher to enthuse? Wow, look at that. Okay, brilliant. And the question is, how much do we stand up and say that? How much are we supporting the educators in the world today? So, Paro, you've been an educator, and Faisal, you have as well, but I'll start with Paro. What struck you about the chapter on education versus edutainment?
Well, there was a wonderful line which, and I'd like to quote, and it's actually a quote of both of you. Mm-hmm. It is on edutainment. Vandana keeps reminding me, he says, that the word education comes from edukos, which means to bring out that which is within. And I think we have forgotten that it's all there inside, and what the teacher, the educator has to do is to bring it out gently, in a fun way, in a way in which the child can be engaged. There's also at the end of this chapter points for you to ponder while hijacking your mind. Think about a subject that you hated in school. Now think about the teacher who taught that subject. Is there a connection? And I'll add that if you think of a subject that you loved, and then think of that teacher, and there is the key. I don't think there's any need for discussion. And I brought along my book, Being Gandhi, which I was asked to write a book on Gandhi for 150 years, and my first response was, no, I don't want to write this book. But the publisher persisted and said, but we want you to write a book such as one that hasn't been written on Gandhi. So while studying what children were studying on Gandhi, I found that we had nichoroded all the juice out of Gandhi and made him beras, dry as paper, and stuck him into textbooks and on currency notes. We had hardened him and put him onto pedestals as stone statues. And there was nothing left to aspire to being Gandhi. And the very first, and when I go into schools to say that today I'm going to talk about Being Gandhi, a book on Gandhi, the reaction of the students is, before they can stop themselves, and the teachers are all, shh, don't do that. You can't do that about Gandhi. And then the title, the very first chapter title is My Life Sucks, Just Sucks. And the kids are kind of leaning forward and saying, how can a book on Gandhi start with that? And it really starts with this child saying, Preeti ma'am is the most boring teacher on earth. It's like a necessary qualification for teachers. Like in an interview, a teacher is asked, are you interesting? Do you have a sense of humor? And if she says, yes, I have a wonderful sense of humor, wrong answer, next. That teacher's not, this is the child's perspective of what a teacher should do and how she should be.
No, great points. I mean, I think, the question is, have we forgotten what education is about? Faisal, what do you think? Have we forgotten what real education is about?
Well, I think we have to really be in tune with the student of today. And I think the first thing to do is to gauge, because I've taught across India and done a lot of teacher training. And it's very important to be able to gauge who is that person that you're finally going to reach out to. I remember very much being in a very small part of Daryaganj in Delhi, which many of you all will recognize. And there was one of my kids, we'd started that Each One Teach One program years ago under the National Literacy Mission. I headed a very big NGO, and kids were going out to teach children their same age or maybe a bit younger. And we were using what we now call that Paulo Freire method, the very famous educationist from South America, where you draw up a vocabulary of kids, what people use, because we each have a different vocabulary. Sitting in IIC, we have our own vocabulary. If we were across the road in Habitat Center, we'd have a very different vocabulary. And if we were at Uberoi Hotel, we'd have a different vocabulary. So there was this boy who thought it was rubbish, starting with words and then breaking down the letters and creating new words. And I said, let's try it. So I started, because the NCRT, very wonderful book at that time, was Bazaar, just the marketplace. So just write up Bazaar. And then ask the kids, what is Bazaar? So they all start talking. These were mainly kids of people who were on construction sites. So Mobile Creche is a center of theirs. So they started talking, and one of the first words that came up with Burr was Bori. Okay? And then I said, okay, Bori. So Bori is what? So this boy thought, why are they saying, sir, why are they saying this word Bori? What has Bori got to do? That's a sack. I said, let's listen to what they're saying. The teacher has to first listen. So they said, Bori, chat hai hamara, zameen par lagakar sote hain, So the whole connotation of Bori, depending on what kind of social class or circumstance you're in, is totally different. So first, to learn the vocabulary of the children. I'll give a very different example. I was in Kashmir working with kids whose parents had been killed by terrorists, and I did that for 7 years. And I thought how to enter that situation, because I'm not going to go in and say, oh, your father's dead and what it was like for you, the rubbish reporter, TV reporter questions. So we just started with, I was doing something on the Kashmiriyat, the feeling of Kashmir, and we just started with their own family histories. And then when you go into people's family histories, say bring photographs from home, talk about your nani or your dadi, talk about a favorite dish, talk about the kind of music you hear. Of course, all of them were into the new music of today. Later, when I used the santoor, they couldn't recognize that it was one of their own instruments. But bringing them towards heritage and history through saying each person's history is a part of the history. I remember doing a workshop here just in the lawns outside, on this side for INTAC. And one of the kids, it was a history thing for INTAC. He said, what is the slave dynasty? I said, what is the slave dynasty? Who built Qutub Minar and all of that? I said, what was it? Let's think. So let's do it in dramatic terms. So what does it mean? And those people were bought and sold in the marketplace. So Balban, Altamash, all the people of that period were really sold in the marketplace. So I said, create a scene. These were 14-year-olds. Create a scene about how you sell a human being. What are the attributes you're looking for? So the child's understanding of the slave dynasty that built those beautiful buildings, the Quwwatul Islam Mosque and so much of Meheroli, just came from that. And I'll give a last example because I'm quite outrageous as a teacher and a teacher trainer. So Sri Ram School had called me in to work with class 11 and 12 because they do a sex education from class 7 or 8. So we had to do something on HIV and AIDS, and I was doing something for the UN at that time. So it's very tough to bring up that topic in a way, and I said it's not difficult at all. So I entered the room, and I said, all of you all are in your room because your parents had sex with each other. Big laughter, embarrassment, ha ha ha, how ridiculous. I said, isn't it true? That is the reality of our lives. So we have to be very open in talking about this in today's world, that what are those barriers now that we see coming in the form of interaction and, relating to the question of sex. So I think it's the entry point I feel would be crucial, and the entry point for this particular age group. I'm working at the present on a play with a group of quite young actors, most of them, one of whom is sitting amongst us just now. And I just get talking about social media, and somebody in the cast told me, a 17-year-old girl, she said it's terrible because everybody constantly posts that they're happy all the time. Don't we see them all over Delhi, clicking selfies of themselves in every situation and posting? I often think who looks at those posts. But he said it's terrible. They're all going through huge nervous breakdowns. They're in a terrible mess, but they're up there on the screen in this way. So how to start the conversation there? Because they're seeing the dissonance, isn't it? So education is about noticing that the dissonance and examining it in a way, isn't it? So you project yourself in a certain way and actually what you're feeling, and the result of that, what's happening to you? What actually is happening to you? To give another example, I work at a counseling center, Sanjeevani, and we just did a wonderful workshop because so many people from satellite towns in Delhi, around Delhi, Bareilly, Meerut, Alwar, the young people moved to Delhi because of the university. And then they realize they have to be with it. They have to buy that makeup, those clothes, they have to shop online, they have to be seen in the right places, they have to date, they have to be on Tinder. Okay? And increasingly through those 3 years in college, the distance between them and their family back in Meerut, Bareilly and Alwar has grown so huge. There is such a complete breakdown in that relationship. So they remain like that, really trishanku, na yaha ka, na waha ka. You know what I mean? And we see this increasingly at Sanjeevani when people come in with their cases, that how do you bridge that gap? And education must help, I feel, in understanding and addressing these issues of today. So
And
it's not,
it-
yeah, go ahead.
And in order to do that, it's really important that the teacher creates some form of psychological safety in the classroom. And, Paro, if I say the word shunya to you, what does that mean?
Yeah. The word shunya brings up rage in me. My daughter was in class 2 in a very good school. And one of the teachers said about her, she's in class 2, said about her, "Aapki beti bilkul shunya hai." So I said, "Kya?" She said, "Your daughter is a 0. She doesn't have anything in her." And I just got up, I was shaking with rage that a teacher should condemn. I mean, I'm still getting goosebumps thinking of it. And I barged into the principal's office, and of course the principal's PA saying, "Ma'am, you can't go in." I said, I was literally almost said, like, "Shut up and sit down." And I walked in, and I sort of was so angry talking to the principal about this. And I don't know whether any action was taken or not, but my daughter is anything but shunya. She's a filmmaker now.
There you
And I've written a story which is coming in Hindi, in a Hindi publication called, and there's a story called Shunya, of a child who is called Shunya by her teacher, and the rage she feels about it. And she's special need. And it was only a question, as Radhika, has taught me so much, Faisal's wife, Radhika, who works in special need, in the area of special needs, is that you just need to teach differently. So again, that whole thing of teaching, and just one more incident which really triggered me and crushed me at the time. I was in class 7, I had won a big Best Actress trophy in a inter-school theatre competition. And I came running into my class holding this trophy, and I said, "I won Best Actress." And the teacher turned around and said, "Now if only you were as good in studies." And it just crushed me completely, but it didn't crush me completely. I had friends like Faisal who helped to build me up again, and I won the Sahitya Academy Award, so I don't think that teacher did that much.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Actually, I have a very tough job up here on stage because these two have known each other since they were like 6 years old. So they really are chuddy buddies. And, so that makes my job even harder, but it's great that we've got the interaction and the stories from back then. I'm just going to read you a paragraph from the book, which is called Rules at School followed the rulers. For years, education in this country and almost all over the world was about rote learning. And unfortunately, Britain was in India during the Victorian period. If Britain had been our rulers after the Beatles, just imagine how different life could have been. The Beatles generation disrupted the culture of Britain completely. It was an exciting time over there where people were doing mad things that didn't have logic. No linear thinking, but squiggly thinking all over the place. If post-Beatles Britain had ruled India, I think India would have been quite a different place. Unfortunately, we had Britain ruling over us during its worst period, at its most conventional, with don't answer back, little boys should be silent and only speak when they're spoken to. And as for little girls, ... I won't read any more from it, but that I think gives you an idea. And one of the big education icons now in India is a person who we're going to hear from now on the screen. We've got Ronnie Screwwala, who's one of India's most successful corporate heads in the country, and previously one of Time 100 most influential people in the world. And he shares how Alyque and theatre influenced his life, and as you know, he's running Upgrad at the moment. So let's just hear from Ronnie Screwwala. Yeah, there's a folder. There's a folder with Ronnie. It should be after Shashi.
What is the most important thing that you think Youngistan needs today, and how do they develop it?
What influenced me and took me away from Alyque's point of view is just that level of discipline. I think there's the army for discipline, and then there's the theatre for discipline. I think my discipline on thinking, on pre-planning, and just when you think you got it right, you go back again and start all over again. So I think one of the strong messages for Youngistan and for all of us actually is some of those learnings there. One being really just about that think again context, that one more time has a resonance that actually is very relevant in everything that I've learned and practiced in the last 50 years in my working professional life.
Thank you. So Ronnie talked very much about how discipline, he learnt from the theatre discipline, and he's used that in his life. In the book, he also gives some other tips and tricks that Alyque taught him throughout his life, and Ronnie very kindly wrote the introduction to the book. One of the other chapters in the book is called Make Way for the C?O instead of the CEO. So we all know that the chief executive officer is the guy who runs the organization. But Alyque says, well, hold on a minute. Chief executive officer. Execute is like, he's from the theatre, right? So it was all very physical. And he said, I just don't think that the chief of an organization should be called the chief executive officer. There's so much more than that. And he talks about his time at Lintas, and he obviously grew the profits of Lintas from a very small amount to hundreds and hundreds of crores. And some of the things that he did was erase the unwritten rules that were prevalent in the workplace. Work hard, work long hours, stay, but enjoy what you do. So one of the things is most people come in on Monday morning into the office and their weekend is over and they're kind of a bit miserable. He didn't want that at his office. So he made Monday mornings red carpet mornings. And so straight out of the lift, he had 2 red carpets and he had snacks like tea and biscuits and sandwiches. And everyone just stayed outside the lifts and they talked about what they did at the weekend and what they're looking forward to in the next week. And he said it really changed the whole fabric of the organization. So he said, I wasn't the chief executive officer, I was the chief visionary officer. I looked at what my staff needed and I envisioned something better. He said, other words that I would use, he said I was the chief stimulation officer. And that obviously is a very key one for Alyque, because that's what he gets people doing. He gets them to stimulate their thinking. He says, I'm the chief reinvention officer, because in an organization you have to reinvent yourself every now and again. So Paro and Faisal, I don't mind which one of you takes this first. I'm just interested to know, the workplace is changing. We've got Youngistan coming into the workplace. They're younger, they're more demanding. They are not so sure of themselves, as you said. They're trying to find their way in this world. What new positions do you think should be invented to support them?
Well, I think one idea that I always use, I never call myself a trainer, though I'm often called master trainer, which is a dreadful term. But I think it's all a question now of facilitation. That's my view. So I think in anything that I do, whether even it's a theatre process or whether it's a training program in mental health or working with teachers or with teacher trainers, I would facilitate that process, because I think it's there, as Paro very rightly said, inside each one of us there's so much that's come out of our own experience that is so completely relevant to what we're doing. And to be able to touch on that, I'd give an example again. Last year I was called by a school I didn't know at all in Delhi. And Delhi, we have these terrible categories of A category, B category, and the C category school got in touch with me. And I said, of course, I'd love to work with you. 5-6 schools across Delhi. It was amazing. They were dealing with COVID and mental health issues in an amazing way. The principal was in touch every day for 1 year with every staff member, every day.
Wow.
She was individually talking to each one. They made a network of parents where if you needed a hospital bed or an oxygen tank, we all know those days in Delhi last year in April, there were so many parents who were doctors who had access to so many things. And through the parent-teacher network of the school, they were able to provide that complete support to the family in their most difficult days. And just listening to the teachers, as facilitating a workshop on their mental health issues. And, the main one, which I was sharing with some colleagues today, is the separation of workplace and home place is gone. And that's a tragedy. That time that Christine and me and many of us spend in that school bus or just commuting from home to school and giving ourselves a time in our heads to make the flip is so crucial. And similarly for the child who's coming into the classroom. They were usually doing the last minute work, stuff, the homework or chatting with friends, whatever it is. But that disengagement and preparing yourself for the next task in about half an hour, 40 minutes, 1 hour away. And similarly, the going home process. So these are things that from listening to the teacher, I began to understand, because there they were in a workshop with me, पीछे से pressure cooker की सीटी, दरवाजे की घंटी, a child asking for something, the maid coming with, we've all seen this in our interactions on Zoom with people in the last 2 years. So I think as our jobs as the head of any organization or as people in managerial positions is how do we facilitate and really, I wouldn't mind being chief listening officer.
Brilliant,
Listening.
brilliant.
I
Well,
think
I
the
actually
listening is crucial.
I got several more from what you said. I got CBO, which is the Chief Belonging Officer.
Okay.
Because what you were saying about the teachers really caring and the head teacher really caring. I think CFO, you said the Chief Facilitation Officer. Also, another form of CEO, which is the Chief Engagement Officer. I think those are three that I heard when you were speaking. So that was brilliant. And you said one earlier, which I thought was really brilliant.
Entertainment officer.
I think that's a good one, isn't it? I think every office across the world should have a chief entertainment officer. And I think we'd be a lot happier working. Paro, that's going to be hard to beat.
That's hard
But do you want to add?
Well, I had thought of a very serious one, which was mentor, the chief mentor of an organization.
Yeah.
But as both of you were talking, I thought of chief rocket officer, who knows where to set the rockets under whom. Do you launch someone into outer space, or do you light the fire under someone's backside where they need it? So maybe chief rocket officer.
Yeah, or chief fireworks officer.
Yeah, fireworks officer.
That would be a good one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I must say, I think that I've often been that rocket officer, kind of disrupting things. And I can see very often teachers becoming extremely uncomfortable when I start a topic. I had told 2 stories to a group, and one was a ghost story, and one was a story on domestic violence. After the session was over, this child said, "Are the stories true?" which is a common question I get asked.
Yeah.
And I said, as I usually do, "What do you think?" And she said, "Well, bhoot ki kahani bilkul nahi thi, but the story of domestic violence is definitely true." So I said, "How do you say with so much confidence that that one was true?" She looked at me and she said, "Because it happens in my home." Now, if a teacher tasked with this question of domestic violence was to go into a class and say, "Is there domestic violence in your home?" none of them would speak up.
Never.
But because it came through you talked of the safety, creating that safe space which should be a classroom, because that safety net had been spread through a story, she was able to talk about what was happening in her home, after which a lot of other children also said that they had been witness to domestic violence in their own homes, relatives, neighborhoods. And I asked them, I said, "So what do you feel when you see it? What do you feel?" And like the character in the book, they felt angry, they felt hurt, but most of all, they felt helpless. Because we leave our children feeling helpless. At the end of all the education, they feel helpless. And this is something that I found very disturbing. And so I said, "Well, but what can you do?" And they said, "Well, what the character in the story did, that's a story. So anything can happen, we can't do that." I said, "But what can you do?" And then one child says, young boy, he said, "When I grow up and get married, if I'm angry with my wife, I'll fight with her, but I won't beat her." And then the girl said, "We'll refuse to get beaten, that's what we can do."
Yeah.
Now this was such a powerful lesson and interaction that I had with them, which couldn't have come except, I think, through something like the arts, where you're talking of such sensitive topics. In another school in Haryana, this 12-year-old girl, she said, because I always ask them, "What do you want me to write on? What are the subjects?" And she said, "Ab bura to nahi manoge?" I said, "Nahi, ab batao." So she said, "Ki आपने वो वाली पिक्चर देखी है ना, I'm forgetting the name of that Swara Bhaskar film which created a lot of ruckus."
Bareilly ki barfi.
No, another one of these 3 friends and
Yes.
Veere the Wedding.
Yeah.
Veere the Wedding. And so this girl says, this 12-year-old child says, "आपको पता है कौन सी सीन के बारे में मैं पूछ रही हूँ?" So I said, "हाँ मैं समझ गई." She said, "आप उसके बारे में क्यों नहीं लिख सकते हो?" It was a scene on masturbation. And she was a 12-year-old child. Now, could I write that story? Perhaps. Would it be published? Unlikely. Would it find its way to a school? Never. But this was a girl in a village in Haryana asking for a story on this subject, which was on her mind.
So there are 2 really big things that came out of this discussion that I used to have with Alyque all the time, was how imagination allows you to explore boundaries that you wouldn't explore in your real life. And I think that is the beauty of theatre and obviously of writing. And I think it can be explored much more, it can be used much more effectively in the workplace as well. And I think, psychodrama and drama in, doing workshops in corporates is a great idea. But just on what you said, if I think about two other titles that we should give to the workplace, one is CSO, which is the Chief Safety Officer. I think that would be a good one. And the other is the CCO, which is the Chief Confidence Officer. Being able to give people the confidence to be able to speak what's on their minds. And one of the other areas we talk about in the book is something called the unspoken dialogues. And the unspoken dialogues is very much getting people to talk about those things that they don't get an opportunity to talk about to anyone. And Alyque used to, after his productions, he used to ask the audience to stay behind, and he would actually ask them to talk about their own experiences. And through that, a lot of people would go home feeling a lot lighter because they had that opportunity. And he actually did a series called The Unspoken Dialogues, where he asked people their stories, and then he got them acted out on the stage. And again, it was a way to kind of release the pressure cooker, or prick the balloon, but let it go down slowly rather than just as a big pop. Okay, I would like to go over to another video. We have Shabana Azmi, who is obviously a Padma Bhushan and a globally feted actor. She talks about her relationship with Alyque and what she learnt. So I think we've got a very quick clip coming up.
Shabana, tell us, in what way did Alyque hijack your mind in Broken Images?
I mean, that is putting it mildly to say that he hijacked my mind, because he really took over my life and did it in a way that I am still very, very grateful for. When I first started working with him, I had different notions about how this was to be interpreted between the two sisters. And it was really Alyque prodding me on, pushing me in the direction of how I could reinterpret the part.
So to set the scene for this next bit, it's a chapter called My 1000 Best Friends, and I think Shabana ji did a fantastic job there. And it goes into what Alyque learnt from the theatre. A journalist wrote to me a year ago asking me how many people I knew well, not just acquaintances, but where I knew what made them tick inside. I called back and told him, probably about, I paused for dramatic effect, then said loudly, yeah, probably about 1,000. He was quite incredulous. 1,000 people, really? Mr. Padamsee, I know you've lived a long life, but surely you can't know 1,000 people and know them that well? Who are they? So I said, oh, you think so? Okay, I'll give you their names. I would start with Hamlet, Othello, Juliet, Romeo, Evita, Portia, Puck, Malvolio, and of course the journalist burst out laughing in total disbelief. The fact is, I do intimately know 1,000 people. Do you know I did 77 plays, so in effect I have 77 different families comprising the characters, the cast, and all the supporting staff. And the truth is that I know characters from the plays, frankly, better than I knew my own children at the time. And that's something that Alyque said. So, Faisal, I'm really curious to know from you. Acting was really, and theatre was really Alyque's first passion, but he had to make money, so therefore he did the advertising. And he said that the reason his advertising was so successful was because of his work in the theatre. Before I ask you the question, I want to ask the audience, do you think it's important to have a hobby that you take really seriously as well as your work? Do you think it's important to have a hobby? Just put your hand up. That you take as seriously or as seriously as your work. That's really good to know. Can I tell you that in Bangalore, maybe 25% said that. And in Bombay, I think it was less than 40%. So Delhi's definitely winning on this score. So my question, Faisal, for you is, Alyque was big on having these hobbies and passions, and he said theatre taught him so much. What did you learn from theatre that you use in the rest of your life?
Well, I think it's what I talked about earlier, the idea of listening. I think that's a very important part of being a director in the theatre. I'm very interactive. I don't start any play with a preconceived notion. And if I read a script and I feel I know how to do it, I will immediately put it into the dustbin. I've got a lovely category called Bhar Mein Jao. So that is the top of Bhar Mein Jao ka pile. Yeah? So it's only when I really don't know how something has grabbed my attention, or I feel it's very important, or I feel it's something that I want to explore thematically. I'll only do plays that appeal to me thematically. I get scripts from writers and very well-known writers regularly, and I can't touch them, even just now in the lobby outside before coming in, because it doesn't get me. You know what I mean? It's got to get you. At a creative bug level, it's really got to get you. So I think that's the first thing, that I know for me it's going to be a personal exploration. I'll give an example from one of my plays years ago, Orni, and two of my cast members, Manohar and Radhika, sitting here. I just read a beautiful short story in Hindi called Kenchuli. Kenchuli, you know, is the discarded slough of a snake. When a snake gets a new skin, and then it leaves the whole old skin over there. The whole shape and the body of the snake is there. So Vijay Dan Deta, very wonderful folklorist and writer from Rajasthan, writing in a dialect of Hindi. The story really captivated me, and I had no idea how I was going to put it onto stage. So I started the first day with just one cast member, who later on played the lead in it, Smita Vats. And I said, what's the story meant to you? They each read it individually. And she said, for me, the story means this, this, this. And in that way, I added my 9 actors, but one a day. तो पहले दिन पर 1, फिर 2, फिर 3, फिर 4, the last day 9 people. And I said, that's enough. And everybody brought their own understanding of the story, what it meant personally to them. And then we started the process of playmaking. So it's always a wonderfully risky, highly creative endeavor. I'm at the present rehearsing something that's going to be on this stage in the next month and a half. And it's very tough because I'm working with a group of very privileged South Delhi actors, and not different from South Bombay, playing poor peasants in China during the one-child policy, you know, which existed there for 35 years. A beautiful novel called The Dark Road. So just exploring first in our bodies, what does poverty and malnutrition really mean? Starting from observation, starting from how bodies change because of the weights that they carry. Okay? How community, which is very close and fraternal, can emerge from just casual labor sitting on the docks or sitting on the site of the Three Gorges Dam in this particular play. So every play for me is a complete discovery, and I think that that wonder at looking at the world, which has come to me from the theatre, I think I have been able to bring it into the rest of my life. So a lot of things I'm happy to explore anew. We tend to look at things in a certain way. For instance, during COVID, I said I want to do something totally different. I'm not with my actors, though I did a lot of work with them on Zoom. So I just looked out and I looked at the house opposite, and I started from the real people who lived there. I created the most outrageous stories and started writing a murder mystery with Paru sitting next to me as the inspiration, as a 62-year-old Punjabi, not widow, which she's not, but just looking at life and examining it in that way. So I think to bring that sense of wonder, excitement, perhaps also the idea of, I think I'm so much a Capricornian, to have a project to work on, And constantly, I think at some level, theatre teaches you to, what should I say, shift your circuits?
Shift your?
Your circuits.
Circuits.
Your electrical circuits. It's
Yeah,
a phrase
yeah.
of very old friend of ours, Jagdish Gidwani's phrase. Very 70s. He was always smoking, so he was shifting his circuits all the time. So just that idea that you engage with the world on a regular basis, you know, whether it's through a news report that gets me thinking, or like did you know there's a place in Heathrow Airport which is lost and found teddy bears? And I just use this with kids in my theatre improvisations, and you should see what they do with it. It's amazing. So just to have a sense of wonder and engagement with the world as it changes and as you change, because I'm not who I was 5 years ago. That would be terrible to still be the same person. So to have that sense of creative exploration, and certainly the theatre has been wonderful for me in that way. So my last play was on the Mahabharata, which I did here. The play before that was A Crime in Delhi. And it was wonderful. We were nowhere ready, am I right, Arnav, when we came up on this stage. And they said, "You've not done the end of the play." I said, "I don't know what the end of the play is. We're writing it as we go along." So they said, "We're going to open it like this at IIC." I said, "Yes, not a problem." So we did literally 2/3 of the play, because the writer and me, both of us were collaborating. We didn't know where the script should go. So at a very key moment in the plot, we just stopped. And I said, "Now what?" The audience said, "What?" It was full over here. "What do you mean there's no end to the story? What's happened? Who's the murderer? Who's this thing?" I said, "Let's think. You've seen the play. What do you think?" So a 12-year-old had one view, a 50-year-old had something else. Some people had the very cliched views. Some people gave me alternative endings. And from what I heard from the audience, we worked on finishing the play and running shows subsequently. But to be open to that, I think theatre has taught me that, to be open to the experience of life. Because too often we just put ourselves into watertight compartments. And there's that beautiful Edward de Bono book, isn't it? Poe beyond yes and no. We always think of these binaries. A question means either you agree or disagree, and sometimes we don't know. We don't know. Are we willing to say, "I want to just think about it and get back to you later"? So maybe that's what theatre means to me.
That's fabulous. So what I heard was listening. So I've learned to listen more. I've learned to observe more. I've learned to kind of look at experiences differently and take them out. And I loved your phrase, which you got from Jagdish, I think you said, shifting your circuits in the brain. Paro, would you add?
Well, for me, it's the word hobby actually has a negative connotation, because when I first started writing, and people would say, for one thing, very few people ask women, "What do you do?" Especially a married woman is never asked, rarely. But if somebody asked, "What do you do?" and I said I was a writer for children, the response was always, "What a nice hobby." And it stung me, because it was my profession.
Yeah.
It wasn't paying me much, but it was still my profession. So I don't really have a separation between profession and hobby. For me,
they're the same.
Yeah. They're passions.
Yeah, they're
they're
passions.
Yeah.
And that's actually the word that Alyque used to use. He always talked about your passions.
Yeah.
And for him, theatre was. And we heard from Ronnie as well. He said that he learnt discipline, which he took to other aspects of his life. So,
I mean, to be a writer and a woman, a housewife, a mother, a grandmother, often means putting writing on the back burner.
absolutely.
So that discipline, which did come from theatre, where you've got to learn your lines, you've got to show up for rehearsals and all of that, and you've got to be this other person. So yeah, that brought the discipline to me in my profession as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I don't know if any of you saw the opening scene of Tughlaq. Did you see that with Kabir Bedi? So Kabir Bedi was on the stage, and he's basically naked. You see his back. And it's all about how he then puts on the clothes and becomes this emperor-like character. And when Alyque and Kabir had first talked about Kabir doing the play, Kabir was very excited because he was, I think, new to theatre at that time.
Little experience in Delhi.
Yes, yeah. He'd had experience in Delhi, that's right. And Alyque looked at him and said, you know, Kabir, you'll have to go to the gym. And Kabir was like, why? And he said, no, you'll just have to go to the gym. In fact, I will come to the gym with you. So Alyque accompanied Kabir to the gym, like literally every day for this 8-week period leading up to the beginning, and made sure he was doing all the right exercises to make sure he looked the way Alyque wanted him to look. So Kabir talks about the discipline that he learned from that respect as well. Okay, great. So we've also talking about theatre then. Paro, I'm interested in knowing, how do you think, we talked earlier about how imagination can really help kids in classrooms, but just going back to this idea, how do you think theatre can help in schools? Because the arts are not, they're not, unfortunately, it's not that they're not well regarded, I think they're well regarded, but there's such a struggle to fit things into the curriculum. Yeah. How do you think something like theatre can be brought in more?
It has to be brought in, stories in whatever form. Theatre, stories, which is so much part of theatre, art, which is so much part of theatre. It's essential. It's not a side activity.
It's not a nice to have. It's a
and it's unfortunately what does happen even in the best of schools is that those are the period which gets dropped or taken over by something else rather than the serious subjects of maths and science.
Maths, physics, chemistry.
Yeah. But just to see how a young person grows, reacts, is astounding. Faisal and I were working, as Faisal mentioned, with young orphans in Kashmir. And they were so tightly wound that a particular exercise, which is a very simple ice-breaking exercise that I do, where one person does a story starter, the next person says the next line, the third person says the third line, and the story builds. They were unable to. They didn't know what a story was.
Wow.
And they were so tightly wound, and then one by one they started coming to talk about the hadsa, as they called it, of their fathers who had died and some who had lost both parents, etc. That, so I asked them to write Achanak Meri Zindagi Mein. I said, take the story anywhere, write your own story. Achanak Meri Zindagi Mein. There were 50 children. One wrote about becoming a movie star. One wrote about an incident in her when she was a baby, something about a snake. And 48 of them wrote about the hadsa in which they had lost their parents. Wow. And they were weeping, they were shaking, and I wondered whether I had scratched at a wound which I didn't know how to put any balm on. So I said, well, we'll all sit together. If you want to read your stories, read it. If you don't want to, don't. But you all have to listen. And while listening, it was so cathartic that immediately after that they did a theatre exercise of a couple in what we call kitchen or home. And they did a theatre exercise. Suddenly they were able to put up a whole play, just two, in groups of two. And it was astounding that just the opening of that plug had released them.
You just need a little fissure for everything to come up.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think I'd like to ask the audience, you all said that you feel that it's a good idea to have a passion, and you've heard how passionately our two panelists have talked about how theatre has not just changed their lives, but changed the lives of these kids in Kashmir and these, people all over the country. Your hobby or your passion that you maybe take seriously, what's it taught you about life? Will anyone volunteer to speak? Because we'd like to hear from you too. So think about a passion that you have. What's it taught you about life, or how does it help you? Okay? Over there. We're just going to get a microphone to you. There we go. Fantastic. Thank you.
I have a passion for being as close to nature as I can.
Right.
Perhaps it stems from having grown up in Bombay initially and had only the sea in front of me. I just love to be in trees and in beautiful forests. And I've carried this passion wherever I've lived. And fortunately for me, I work in something called International Maternal and Child Health, which takes me all over the world. And I have cultivated this passion wherever I've been, and it's given me the most enormous peace and sense of, how wonderful the world is. Nature teaches you so much.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So your passion for nature has given you peace, no matter where you are across the world. What's that?
Tremendous.
Tremendous, yeah. No, completely agree. Any one other person want to share with us a passion that they have? Okay, we have someone at the back.
My name is Subhash Verma.
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
My name is Subhash Verma.
Hi, Subhash.
Ever since I was a child, I had a passion for expression, to be able to tell what I was feeling. And during COVID times, I was stuck at home and didn't know what to do. And I took up writing some poetry, and also, whenever an occasion arose, walking in the Lodi gardens.
Yeah.
So the last 3 years, fortunately for me, I have taken pictures which I thought were permanent features of nature, but even that was changing every day. The trees were different. Some trees that I liked had fallen. There were pools that had filled up, and there were flowers that were not growing anymore. There were dogs which had left the garden, and I saw that permanent change happening, even this stillness of nature.
Yeah.
It was moving, and that was a moving story. I have generated more than about 3,000 photographs during the last 3 years.
Wow.
And it's a wonderful document of my own personal travel through time during those COVID periods.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Both of you, thank you for sharing. So one of the things that Alex says is that you must all have a passion. And if you have that passion, you'll find that it will cross-pollinate and it will help you in other aspects of your life. Talking about other aspects of our lives, Alyque was known for many things. He was also known for having 3 wives. And so inevitably, the issue of marriage would have to be discussed. And there is a chapter called, Do You Need a License to Marry Your Wife? Or marry your spouse, I should say, because we tried to be gender neutral as we were going through this. And all he basically says in this is, all the religions that he knows of all talk about till death do us part. So marriages, and obviously in Hinduism we say Sat Janam. So we have all of this. And he says, but the challenge is, in all other aspects of our life, we have to do some kind of renewal. So at school, every year you have to take an exam, and only then can you move to the next level. And when you're working, every year you have an appraisal, and only if your appraisal is good do you then get promoted. And he says, what about marriage? nobody ever thinks about marriage, and does that need to be renewed? And he looked around and he saw that many, many people that he knew were unhappily married. I think present company accepted, because these two have been married to their respective spouses for 30, 40 years, I think, respectively. But so he came up with this very outrageous idea of having a 5-year marriage license. And what he says is that what we should do is we should say that every 5 years, it's compulsory for both parties to come together and say that they want to renew the marriage. And if one party says no, the marriage separates, and then there's a whole kind of prenuptial, I guess, that you go through to decide how everything will be split. But the idea is not actually to split. The idea is that in the 4th year, you're kind of like looking and saying, I actually quite like being with him or her, but am I doing enough to keep this marriage alive? So maybe it will get people thinking about renewing their marriage in some form. So I do want to ask both of you independently, you've both been married to your respective spouses for a long time. What's the secret?
Well, I think that marriage is the only man-made relationship. Everything else is a natural relationship. There's the only one. Man-made, woman-made, who knows? But
man-made.
but honestly, I think it's an unreasonable contract, honestly, that you are expected to live the rest of your life with this person, share everything, including the loo, with that person, every night the same bed, I mean, it's an impossible standard that you're trying to achieve. One of the secrets of our marriage, Keshav's not here yet, maybe that's one of the secrets that he doesn't hear all this, is that we both travel a lot, often in opposite directions. So while we've been married almost 42 years now,
wow.
Maybe you can knock off at least 5 or 6 years in travel. No, but seriously, I think it's trust, that you honestly do, there's honesty and trust in your relationship.
Okay, thank you. Fazal, we have Radhika here in the audience.
Yes, he's right
too.
here, so I better be careful about what I say. Communication.
We'll ask her to comment as well.
Okay. I think communication is the big one. To be able to speak quite openly about what's on your mind, what you're feeling, what's changing, what you're seeing changing in the other person and in situations around you. I also think, for me, the whole part of my maternal family, that includes my uncle Alyque Padamsee. Of the 14 cousins of us who are there, 7 of us are married and 7 of us aren't. And there's been every variation on the theme there. So a lot of people are 30 years living in with the same partner. Many are divorced, twice divorced, thrice divorced. So there's a whole range of experiencing there. And knowing Alyque's colorful story, as everybody does, and my father's equally colorful story, I think maybe me and my sister took the staider path and decided if we were marrying, it was for keeps. Okay?
Right.
So maybe it was a reaction to AP as well, okay, and to what was happening with his children, my cousins, and various things along the way. So you see and you understand and you wonder and you question. I questioned him a lot. I was not his most favorite nephew at all. I was very much persona non grata. So I think that is a question, because finally a marriage is about 2 people. It's not just about one person. And I think the sooner people realize that it is about 2 people walking together, I think that's very, very crucial. And to have that respect for the other person and the care and the love and the trust, to walk along with the other person is at least very important for me. And perhaps because I've had 2 dreadful examples in my immediate family, it was easier to do that. Because I said, I definitely don't want this. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I think rejection has its own, the beauty of rejection is that sometimes you really think very deeply and hard.
It's interesting what you said, Faisal, because the Tibetan definition of marriage, if you look at what they say, marriage is two things. It's companionship and helping the other person grow. Not helping you grow, because the other person is also going to be in that relationship. So it's companionship and helping the other person grow. And that's very much
So I'm a
what it sounds
born-again
like.
Tibetan, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I would add friendship.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
companionship. I
Companionship
think
and
you
friendship.
have to.
Yeah.
And
My
laughter.
husband and I are best friends and have been before we got married and still.
And so do you think a 5-year, with the idea that the purpose is not an easy get-out clause, but this idea of 5-year renewable, but getting people to rethink after 5 years, am I doing enough? Do you think that's a good idea or a
Rubbish.
rubbish? You think it should just be, audience, good idea or bad idea? Do you feel that we should have a renewable license for marriage with the aim of making marriages last longer? No. I think we're getting a resounding no from Delhi. I think this is where Bangalore, I think, was ahead of Delhi. We had about 30 to 40% there thought it could be a good idea. All right, there's one last question that I just want to ask you, Faisal. Just 2 minutes, if you can keep it to 2 minutes, because then we want to allow 5 minutes for questions from the audience. One of the other chapters in the book is called Repaying the Accident of Birth and Bonus Babies. And it's basically saying that if you're here in this auditorium, or you're able to buy the book, or you're even able to get a knocked-off digital copy of the book, then you are privileged. And if you are privileged, then it's your duty to give back to society. So Alyque was very big on giving back. He did lots of advertising campaigns. He went out. Faisal, you shared a story with me earlier about Alyque and something that happened, and I'd love it if you could share it with the audience.
I'll keep it very brief. I got a call one night, late at night, 11:30, from Alyque in his inimitable style. "Fi, we've got to go to Rajasthan tomorrow." I said, "What's happening, Alyque?" Because I wasn't his go-to person at all. So he'd read an item in the papers the previous day. There had been a rather horrific incident just a little away from Ganganagar in one of the small little villages in the interior of Rajasthan. And a young child had gone into a place of worship and picked up something, and the diya had fallen over and got extinguished. And the Brahmins in the village were furious. They caught hold of this boy, they caught hold of his mother. The mother was very aggressive and abusive and Dalit, and they put black paint all over her, stripped her clothes, paraded her around the whole village in sight of everybody nude, and beat her to death. So this is what had appeared in the papers. And of course, Brinda Karat had got into the act and wanted to do something. And Alyque just read this, spoke to Brinda Karat, and came to Delhi, hired a car, and said, "Come on, we're going. Will you come?" I said, "Of course I'll come. My background is I'm a master's in social work," and walked into many difficult situations. So we just drove through the night and into the next morning, picked up somebody from a local, probably communist comrade, and then we went to this village, and the village was agog because so many reporters had come to carry this kind of story. But we made it a point, and they said, "Oh, nothing has happened, this is all rubbish, or ye kahani hai, or kisi patrakar ne pata nahi kahan se dhoond liya," the usual cover-up. So we went to the house, we took the children. There was the young boy, Sardar boy, and his sister. The father said they can't stay here because they'll be killed. And we drove to Jaipur. This is all continuous, so it's 48 hours of travel. And he managed to get an appointment with Bhairav Singh Shekhawat, who at that time was the chief minister, and got an assurance from them that there would be safe protection, these people would get land, and the children would get into a boarding school, so they didn't have to be in that situation. Whether anything further happened in the case about convicting people in the village, I don't know. But certainly this was a facet of Alyque that very few people knew. Or the other story, I don't know, can I share it, Disha's story, or are you going to do that? We want to stop
I
there?
think Ryle
Okay.
would
Okay,
prefer it if
we'll
we
be
didn't.
without
Yeah.
it. Okay. So he had the ability to do that. It's not given to most of us to read something in the papers and not only write a check, but actually to decide to get involved. So that idea of being able to get involved and make a difference in that way, many of us may think it's idiotic, it's systemic. You know, the Rajputs there are going to be like this. It's always been like that. How can we change it? But actually to be able to do that, and I saw it, otherwise I would never believe that this was even possible. It was against many ethics of social work, but he did it, and certainly he gained a very different sort of respect for me for being the kind of person who could do it. This is one of many other instances in his life that he just went out and did.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We are almost at time, so we've got a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience for any of our panelists? Any questions? Okay, in that case, the last thing that I'll leave you with, Alyque, of course, was also known as God. I think many of you will know this. And of course, because he is God, he wasn't happy with the 10 commandments that were given by the original God. And he came up with his own. So I just want to read these to you, because one of the things we'd really love to hear from you all on social media or email us is, what would your 10 commandments be? Right? So these are Alyque's. The first is, thou shalt treat all human beings as equal. Number 2, thou shalt speak out when thou seest injustice. Number 3, thou shalt help thy neighbor in need. 4, thou shalt shun dishonesty. 5, thou shalt respect thy neighbor's religion. 6, thou shalt build bridges, not barriers. 7, thou shalt not practice double standards. 8, thou shalt always respect women. 9, thou shalt not blame the many for the sins of a few. And 10, thou shalt always listen to the voice of thy conscience. Ladies and gentlemen, IIC, thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I hope you've got an insight into the crazy, wonderful mind of Alyque Padamsee and the joy I experienced of spending 3 years working with him on bringing this book. And we look forward to getting your feedback. Thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you, Vandana.
Thank you.
Will you sign my